you must be so brave or so courageous or something. It didn't feel like that to me. It felt like, okay, I am still alive and my friends are dead. I can do these things and therefore I must. And that didn't feel very choiceful.
Welcome to Normalize the Conversation. I'm your host, Francesca Reicheter, and today I'm joined by climate justice leader and author of Truth Demands, a memoir of murder, oil wars, and the rise of climate justice, Abby Reyes, whose work bridges personal healing, environmental activism, and systemic justice. In this episode, Abby shares the powerful and often painful journey she experienced while writing her memoir, Truth Demands, revisiting deep wounds from the murder of her partner and fellow land defenders in Colombia. She reflects on how processing that grief fueled her life's mission to confront environmental injustice and champion community-led climate solutions. This conversation offers a raw, heart-opening look at how personal trauma and healing are intertwined with the fight for climate justice, and how reclaiming hope can inspire global change. Abby, thank you so much for joining me today. You have such a powerful story, and I am so grateful to have you on. But before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
Today, I am um, I'm occupied. My mind is occupied because I'm at the part of parenting in which my kids are leaving. And so my 18-year-old is off to college already, and the 16-year-old is about to embark on a service learning trip all summer. So how I am really includes a bit of letting go. Like I notice in the background there's a lot of work of letting go that's happening as I go about my day. Thank you for asking.
Of course, it's so funny you say that because my mom is going through the same thing right now. So, my brother moved to Tampa for school and he would come home a lot, but he just bought a house out there and was like, I'm staying. And I then decided, or I first moved across the country to California, and then he decided to stay across the state. So, my mom, for the first time, is going through that transition and that loss. And it's really hard on her. And I get those moments from her where she's like, I just miss you guys so much. And my whole identity to this point has been being a mom. And now I'm learning who I am in my role outside of it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I'm just at the beginning of that. So that's the finger on my pulse, includes that aspect of my life today.
And I know it won't be an easy transition, but I hope it's full of so much joy as you get to explore different aspects of who you are. But who you are, by the way, is just so amazing. I mean, reading through your story, you went through so much, and to have taken that and written a book and starting to share your story, I imagine it had to be so painful reopening these wounds and then almost like grieving all over again.
Hmm. I uh, that is true for me. And in the process, I learned some new skills for how to navigate differently this time around. So I will just, for the sake of the listener, tell a little bit of my story, and then we can talk about that skill building that a lot of people helped me do over the last few years. So when I was 24, my life was kind of flipped upside down in this geopolitical nightmare involving murder and oil wars and indigenous peoples and stolen land. And in navigating together with others toward justice, I was also navigating the waters of grief. And that was a grief held by many and many different communities all around the world. And we were all grieving in different ways. And at the same time, we were thrust into the spotlight of needing to do a lot of advocacy work here in the United States to stop harmful policy choices that were being made in the wake of the murders of our friends, and also to stop harm on the ground. So the context includes that I'm a human rights and environmental lawyer, and I have mostly, in different parts of my career, worked with communities that are fighting the adverse effects of mining and oil and gas projects. So, a lot of times when an oil company comes in, the resources, what they think of as the resources that they're after, are often on lands held in stewardship by indigenous communities. And in many indigenous communities, oil is not to be taken out of the ground because of our relationship between the understood relationship between humans and the natural world is one of kinship, such that we wouldn't do that unless we wanted to end up with the kind of climate crisis that we find ourselves in now. So, in a lot of those places where indigenous people are saying no, no to this extraction of oil from this land, or other fossil fuels, the communities get caught in the crossfire of often armed conflict, with not only the protectors of multinational corporations, but also the governments that have the military might of public forces behind them, as well as in a country like Colombia, where my friends were, that this struggle was taking place during a very prolonged period of civil war in a part of the country in which the oil pipelines have always been a magnet for armed violence. So when I when we were doing this work, I very much fell in love with one of my colleagues in the work, and his name was Terence Freitas, and he and I both had just a few years earlier finished college. We each, in parallel to each other, studied conservation and community development. This is ages and ages ago. And then I had gone to the Philippines, my father's homeland, to work under the mentorship of Jesuit lawyers there who had a very deep spiritual practice and lawyering practice to serve the poor. And they were doing so through environmental legal assistance, so helping people with their land claims, helping to teach people about what to do if they see illegal fishing or illegal farming, cutting of the forest. And Terrence, I was doing that in the Philippines, and Terrence was doing that kind of work with this community in Colombia. And then when we met on our very first briefing about the Colombia work, he asked me out on a date. And so this was like, early and young love for me and for him, and but in the context of this beautiful and deep commitment we had made to support the vision of this indigenous leadership who was really helping us as a species figure out how to get into right relationship with oil. And in the course of that work, they were, Terence, together with two of his mentors, Lahaina Ege and Ingrid Washinawatuk. Ingrid was native to the Menominee Nation in Wisconsin, and Lahe was native Hawaiian. All three of them were doing work with the UA at a certain point, and they were kidnapped and murdered while doing that work. And so for me, their murders were this like a harbinger of the climate chaos that we now face. And at the very same time, the way they lived their lives and what they dedicated themselves to helped usher in what we're seeing now with the rise of climate justice. And, things seem so bad and so hard, But at the very same time, I would guess because of the generation that you're in, you're also seeing and hearing and knowing that there's a whole bunch of folks all around the world, mostly from your generation, who are not having it, who are saying no to the kinds of exploitation that leads to murders like this in the first place. So I came into adulthood through the gates of these murders with that paradox lodged in my throat. And I then, therefore, even in the midst of like all this work we were doing to change the circumstances, uh, I was, my voice was clipped. Because what do you learn from a murder like this? What you learn is you speak up and you get killed. And that's the kind of thing that one could be learning really readily, even from the sidelines now as we watch our social media feeds, right? Like what happens when you speak up? Well, and I desperately needed that to not be the lesson. So we were out there for decades, continuing the work, pursuit of justice on many different levels, and at the same time, my own voice was very clipped. So what happened was, um, even as this indigenous community has, in many ways, asserted self-determination and gone ahead and like gotten all their young people trained up to be continuing to lead this kind of work really successfully. In parallel to that, over these decades, since these murders, Colombia has entered a new phase of its internal armed conflict, which for the last 8 years or so has looked like a peace process. And in that peace process, they invited me to participate as a recognized victim in case 001 of their transitional justice process, their what's called a truth and recognition chamber. And so doing that meant that if I was going to do that, it meant answering Columbia's questions of me and of Terrence's mom. And those questions included like, tell us your stories, show us your mementos, like take us back. How has it been for these 20 years that he's been dead and justice has not been served? What was the impact on you of these murders in your youth? And also, by the way, like what are your questions? If if you could now confront the people who killed your friends and your beloved, what are your questions for them? So it was like a really tall order. And I could tell even at the beginning that even as I wanted to enter that process, I didn't know how to do it in a way that would not cause me to go back to the feeling of drowning, which is how I experienced grief.
I first just want to say I'm so sorry for your loss, and I am so incredibly amazed by your resilience.
Mhm.
As someone who's just learning how to use her voice, I know the moments I feel terrified and overwhelmed, and for the way that you experience it at such a young age, your early experience to it, introduction to it, to still have kept going is nothing short of just being Wonder Woman, honestly. And I'm just so curious on how so many of us feel so frustrated and angry with the impact on our climate, big oil, of so many different people not caring, of not listening, of not trying, of putting their own special interest first. Yet so many of us kind of complain about it, but don't do anything, don't take those action items, don't use our voice, feel maybe defeated and powerless in it. How did you even get to a point where you were like, I'm going to fight this fight?
Hmm. Well, I appreciate that question. There are several layers of my answer. Um, The most basic layer is that when I was 24, 25, 26, 27, it did not present itself to me as a choice. I felt beholden to the pursuit of justice because there were so many known and unknown dismal facts related to this set of murders. And there were so many questions about the relationship between the oil companies and their contractors who were there and the violence. And those questions needed to stay, like they stayed unanswered for a long, long, long time. And in the meantime, there was all this continued violence happening to the people and the places that we loved. More violence happened, more life was taken even after our friends were murdered. And I grew up like in a family dedicated to public service and kind of with the ethic of, that what is typical, to whom much is given, much is expected, and with this understanding of my own capabilities as a young person that included like, I can and therefore I must. And I don't know, there was maybe 10 years ago, there was an article in The Atlantic about the teen suicide wave that went through the high schools in Palo Alto, California. I don't know if you're familiar, but some of the teens who spoke out during that horrific period elucidated that among the pressure people were feeling could be characterized by the academic pressure and the like pressure to be perfect by this ethic that I just said of I can and therefore I must. And it's such a pressure filled way of going through one's youth, and I could relate to it. I remember like ripping ripping that reflection out of the magazine. It was like a physical magazine that I was looking at. And I had it up on my computer for a long time because I didn't know why it bothered me so much. But I think why it bothered me was because my answer at one level to your question, which you framed as like, you must be so brave or so courageous or something. It didn't feel like that to me. It felt like, okay, I am still alive and my friends are dead. I can do these things and therefore I must. And that didn't feel very choiceful. And a consequence of go, 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 do, get the thing done, stop the harms where we can, be strategic, like act strategically to protect people and water and mountains. A consequence of that was that we were doing work in a manner that didn't always embody the values underlying the vision of the world we were trying to create, which I understand now is available to us and pretty important if we want to figure out how to get to the future of thriving that we know is possible. We're not going to get there through the same means that got us in the mess that we're in now, which includes exhaustion, overwork, you know, lack of recognition of one's agency to make choices about how we engage. I can see that now. I couldn't see that then when we were in the years after the murders doing so much in triage. So the other way I would answer your question is I guess I would take the listener just right to this learning that I've been doing since initiating my participation in the Truth and Recognition Chamber, when I had figured out that it was going to take me back into the trauma. I realized, thankfully, with the guidance of lots of people, that it was going to be important for me to ask for help and to have witness of the process. So, one thing that would happen would be because it was the pandemic and because it was a transnational proceeding, my participation was on Zoom and via email. So I would, of course, I had a team of lawyers helping me, but I also soon figured out that I needed a support team. And like anytime an email would come in from Colombia in which I learned something new about the murders, say, or even just, something procedural about how the hearing was going to go, I, I, I would get into a freeze response and go right back into the feeling of overwhelm that I had experienced all through my 20s. And the physical sensation that I had was, like I have referenced, I think a couple of times, is that it felt like drowning. So I had already been doing a lot of work to literally swim, because I had found the trick with swimming, for me at least, is when I'm swimming, my survival depends 100% on how I'm using my breath. And if I'm like paying attention to the air going in and the air going out, I can regulate how I can move through the water. And I actually am in charge of that. I do have agency over that. And then it tricks my mind to be exactly in the present moment, because you can't really, you can't have, a podcast running in the back when you're swimming. You're not like, it's not like walking with a friend when you're just gabbing about whatever. It's not like other kinds of exercise where you almost distract yourself also while you're doing it. So for me, like physical, actual swimming in the ocean or rivers or lakes or pools became this tool that I used for not drowning. And then in the metaphor, the 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 navigation of the waters of grief, it meant that when I was going through the process with the Truth and Recognition Chamber, in which, we interacted with the people who gave the order to kill, and the people who were the commanders in charge of those people. So it's really, really intense. And I, a turning point for me was when one coach, my friend Jody Tonita, when she helped me understand, like, hey, actually, she called it a trauma reality check. She was like, actually, what I'm observing is you're saying you feel like you're drowning and you're not actually drowning. She was like, just, like, what if this is not an ocean of grief or an ocean of trauma? What if it's a puddle? Like, and then she had me physically, like, tap my foot to, like, feel where the bottom of the water was. And I was like, yeah, I feel the bottom. And she was like, stamp it, so I like got up from my desk and I like stamped my foot to like feel the bottom of the puddle. And she was like, this is, this trauma, it's a puddle and you've got rain boots. And that reframe for me, oh, this is a puddle and I've got rain boots, somehow unlocked my own agency in relation to the story. And it included an understanding that it's survivor's guilt that says, you can and therefore you must. It's survivor's guilt that says they died and you're still here. So you've got to keep going. And that narrative needed challenged if I was going to figure out how to be in this proceeding and not drown. And the challenge to that narrative is actually, I get to say, stop. Like, I get to say, no, it's too much. I get to say, we're going to end this session now and we can continue another time. And that's really different than being pushed around by a process, or what I experienced in the times that felt so overwhelming for so many years was that I was at the whim of other people. I was at the whim of older adults. I mean, I was an adult. I was in my mid-20s when these things happened. But the decision makers seem to all be generations with generations more experience than I had, right? And um, it didn't feel choiceful until I learned some skills around going ahead and claiming uh, what I needed. And so even for me as somebody who's twice that age now in my early 50s, I'm still like experimenting with what does it look like to say what I need, or say what I want. It's not obvious. I look at my goddaughters who are around your age who have so much more agility to to actually navigate the world and say what they want and what they need. And I'm really glad that that's available to them. But even as a 50-year-old, I'm learning it.
Okay, wait, that reframe, by the way, oh, I there's so many things you said that I just was like, wow, that's exactly how I'm feeling. And I would not have been able to put it into words. And to hear that reframe, you just helped me so much. Oh my goodness. Because that exactly, I can, therefore I must. That became my mindset at 20 years old in that psych unit the day I found out that I survived and so many others didn't. I became a statistic of someone who did survive the suicide attempts, but the reality of how privileged I was to have that second opportunity and to feel that intense pressure to keep going and trying to be the kind of person who can fight for others, who can use her voice, and getting to a point where I wasn't sleeping. I still don't sleep, so I don't know why I'm like, I wasn't. I don't. Keep going because you feel like you need to do what everyone expects of you. And people are constantly telling you to do more, to be more, right? You're trying to live up to the generations above you and what they're doing and to just feel like you're drowning in it every single day. I can't tell you how many nights I just like wake up in a panic attack, just in tears, not feeling like I'm drowning. So that reframe, wow, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to share it because it felt like a gift that was given to me, a gift that I like readily deployed right away as soon as I like understood it in my body. I wanted to share a story also about the process that I went through to understand how to more fully inhabit what poet David White would call the temple of my adult aloneness, which is a beautiful place, but that for many years felt really terrifying. And part of my process for getting there included befriending, like noticing and befriending a part of me inside that one might characterize, in psychology as like a younger self. That you and I, Fran, talked about a little bit, the younger self who was like, go, 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 do, do, do. For many years, I related to her as the overwhelmed part of myself. And I kept trying to fix the overwhelm. And for me, for many years, that looked like if I just did my whole list, if I just completed my whole to-do list, then I could rest and then I wouldn't feel overwhelmed anymore. What I have learned now is that for at least for myself, that might not be the recipe. The list never ends. Like that's an illusion, right? And the work is never done.
Ever.
And so the recipe can't be finish it and then rest. And so what I came to understand because of a gift that some therapist friends gave me is that the my job actually when I'm noticing the exhausted part of myself or that little girl is just to notice and like just to sit with her. It's not to fix it. It's just to be present to that unhealed part. And in so doing, I can notice and listen for the care instructions. Like my key question needs to be to her, okay, what are the care instructions? Like what's actually needed here? And when I got still enough to listen in that way, I could understand that more often than not, she just needed some attention. And then I could comprehend her actual gifts. Her gifts on the surface level seem to me to be the gift of you can keep going, Energizer Bunny. You can just keep going, keep going, keep going. But her deeper offering was that it was this very same part of me who knew fiercely belonging, who knew fiercely belonging, the sense of belonging in the world from the time before the first harms, who knew fiercely that there was a way to move in the world that asserted my own place in the web of life, in the family of things, not from an injured place, but from a place of wholeness that preceded all of the shitty things. And once I got access to that, I could understand that her actual offering was let's approach all of this work out in the world with like full creativity and full voice and like bringing in the heart and bringing in the art in ways that our rational mind sometimes would say, oh, well, those things don't matter. What really matters is the nitty gritty political work or whatever. So I just wanted to offer that because this question, the reframe of I don't have to fix the exhaustion. I just have to ask what the care instructions are. Really helped me. And maybe it'll help some others.
Wow. Again, the power of inner work, first of all, and just being present with yourself and being able to give that version of yourself, that piece of yourself that needed that attention, that needed that compassion, to be present with her, to give her that is so incredibly powerful in a way that I never understood before. It's so powerful. It's so impactful. I'm so grateful you shared that story.
Thank you, good. It's just that it doesn't need fixed. It just needs attention. And then what else can it offer us? Probably a lot. And I'm hopeful that it can be received as a gift by listeners for that interruption that we need to redirect ourselves in a kinder and more tender way to the little ones inside of ourselves,
Yeah,
right?
we so need it. And to hear that you're still learning as you go, that's so, I think, hopeful for me that we
Hmm.
don't have to have it all figured out right now. We learn as we go and we figure out the tools. I mean, how are you learning? How are you figuring out these tools?
Well, because I did learn early on, like at the time of the murders, I had a friend, her name is Janice Rouse. She's there, she's in Orlando and she's a body worker. She runs a training called Body Dialogue. And when Terrence was kidnapped together with Ingrid and Lahe, that was a Friday. And then for the next 8 days, we were working ourselves to the bone to try to find them and to try to get in touch with the people who had them, to figure out what the demands were, to get them out, to get them home. And at a certain point in those 8 days, early on, you know, clearly none of us was sleeping, and clearly there was like this real urgency that did not feel like a choice, that really did demand of us to be alert and unified and attentive and strategic. But my friend Janice pulled me out of that fray for an afternoon during the kidnapping and put me on her bodywork table. She did Alexander techniques. She wanted to help like get my meridians cleared. And when I stood up from her table after, which had felt like she was like opening up the back of a watch really delicately and like fixing things inside my body that were happening at the level of energy, not, a surgery. But when I stood up, I told her that Terrence, my beloved, that he had like been there with me when I was on the table, and that he had bare feet and he was like light and unburdened and like trying to get me to join him in feeling okay. And I told her these things, and she rested her head on top of her hand on the door frame, and she goes, Abby, nothing now is too much to ask. And I didn't know what she meant, but I held on to it and eventually, figured it out. But what she knew in that moment that we didn't know till days later, and didn't know the further details of until 25 years later, we went through this transitional justice process, confronting the people who pulled the trigger, was that they were dead. That they had been killed. And what I'm saying is, what we do know now is that the time frame in which the order to kill was given coincided when I was on the table with Janice. And, you know, fortunately, very soon thereafter, I really came to understand what it means to ask for help. Okay, nothing now is too much to ask. When it is life and death, fortunately, somewhere inside of me, and probably because of teachers like Janice, I understood we are in this together. This is not my story. This is not the story of the beleaguered community fighting the oil companies. Like, this is a human story, and we are together in the web of life, and we depend 100% on each other. And so, if I'm going to carry this heavier part of the story, I'm going to need help. And so, all of this also was taking place in New York City. And during the kidnapping and thereafter, just these healers just came out of the woodwork from every corner of life. And it felt like a mobilization of a peaceful healing army around us to make sure that our bodies could stay tethered to the earth. So that to make sure, frankly, Fran, to make sure that we didn't try to go where they were.
Yeah. Impact of community, of people showing up, of being there for you is so incredibly important. I'm so grateful you had that and that you're still here and that you're able to be this voice, this just incredible, incredible human. That's, I have no words other than I'm so grateful that you had that.
I am too. And basically the message of those grown-ups to young me was like, this feels like the worst. It is pretty bad. And the sun rises. and we're going to get some water in you, and we're going to eat something today. We're going to move our bodies. Like this is, it is, these things coexist. So I had early lessons in holding like contradictory truths or so many paradoxes and the I got comfortable with life including ambiguity and um, a mix between the blasphemous and political and the mysterious and spiritual and the mundane. These parts of our lives are happening all at the same time. And the thing about being stuck in a body is that there's a backstop. Like there is a physical limit. And we would do well to figure out ways to not bump up against that limit, right? But when everything in the political and when everything feels like too much, it at least for me, and I think for many others, neglect of this physical container of the self is, it was easy for that to go out the door first. So I had to do a lot of relearning around that because there's this do you know this Catholic monk named Thomas Merton who was a writer?
Me
Uh,
too.
there was a point at which I was both I knew that I had like inner work, so to speak, to do, the psychological and the spiritual. But then I also had all this political work that just was demanding in the ways we've been talking about. So my solution was like to leave New York City and go to the woods. Like, you just moved to California. I moved back to California and this time to this beautiful forest, redwood forest outside of Santa Cruz, so in the middle of the state, where my friends' families had a yoga teaching center and an arts campus. And it was a residential community. So I came knocking and just said, "Can you take me in? Like, I need to be on the land. I need to grieve. I need to figure out what my inner world is. And I need to continue doing this political work." So I went to the mountain to do all this inner work, but I didn't stop the political work. And it was a very compromised way of going through that period because what my body needed was to literally stop. But what the world needed of me was not that. So at a certain point, Terrence's mom, so the mother of my boyfriend who was killed, she faxed us a message from Thomas Merton, meaning like she still doesn't have email, but then she definitely none, we barely had email. This is so long ago, I'm not kidding. So out of our into our office in the fray, in the mix, came this couple of sentences from the Catholic monk Thomas Merton. And he reminded us that, quote, "There is a pervasive form of contemporary violence in which the idealist fighting for peace by nonviolent methods most easily succumbs, activism and overwork. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of the activist neutralizes work for peace. It destroys the fruitfulness of our work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful."
Wow.
Which I just like really appreciate that reminder from Thomas Merton. And of course, there's a way one could word it that's like not so negative. Like he's basically like, this is violent too. This is not what you mean to be doing. But the flip side of it is like, can we figure out how to give ourselves a break? Like, how do we keep doing good work in the world in a way that is also sustaining?
Wait, thank you so much for sharing that. It's so true. And I mean, going right back to what you said about, learning to rest, to eat, to move your body. We often forget the most basic part of being a human being, right? Taking care of our physical self, the basis of being able to function at our best, to give ourselves even a chance to be present, to be there, to be who we are, and to do what we want to do, to be able to heal, to be able to grow. I mean, it's the very basis of it. That, wow, I am going to write that down and just reflect back on that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, and it's in the book. You can find it.
But one thing you also said was the contradictory truths. I noticed one thing, and I was going to bring it up, is you say and, you don't say but.
Mhm.
That is so powerful.
Yes, and that's a practice that I learned very consciously also from a bunch of other people who taught me the usefulness in practicing together in community. Practice to me, a daily practice means, something that we repeat in order to um, change, make some kind of internal change through a um, a method that might start out as feeling kind of foreign to us, but because of daily attention to it, becomes re becomes habit and can replace habits that don't serve us anymore. So in the case of the people who taught me to move from but to and, um, they didn't do that by giving me some instruction like, hey, change your language and the rest will flow and follow. It was more, well, here's what we do together and how we get from but to and. And the group of people I'm talking about right now are monks and nuns, many of whom are in their 20s from countries all around the world, particularly in Southeast Asia and Vietnam, um, and in the United States, Vietnamese Americans who live and practice together at it's called a practice center in this tradition of Buddhism. So their practice, yes, looks like meditation or walking meditation, but it also looks like singing together in an a cappella choir. And it also looks like running an entire residential community and retreat center. And it looks like being in circle together. So different kinds of sharing around the teachings and around reflecting on our own um, capacity to hold the contradictions, the contradictory truth at the same time. When I saw how they were doing it together, I could understand finally this idea that working and continuing to work to help make the world a better place might be work that never ends, but it's still worth doing. Or if we were to put it in the better context, it's work that never ends and it's still worth doing. And my struggle in watching how these monks and young monks and nuns um, in this community that I was part of for a while, watching how they do it was, I was like, yeah, but I was still in the buts. And I was like, okay, it's work that never ends, but I'm really exhausted. Like, I think you have to rest. Like, I don't think we just keep going. I think we have to rest. But the answer, which they didn't give through words, they gave it through just how they were living their lives and the example they were setting was that's why we rely so heavily on community. Because when you're in, for example, when you're in a chorus together, and say you're all singing the same thing and there's like 15 of you, if one person's voice needs to drop back, it's okay because other people are sustaining the note. And then when the person is who's taking the rest is refreshed, they come back in and somebody else can tap out without the worry and all that fear we carry of like, if I stop, all of the work is going to stop, or the note will not be sustained, the song will not be sustained. And this is something that we learned also really clearly with the community in Colombia, who was fighting the oil company, the UA Pueblo. Um, one of one of Terrence's pieces of writing to a friend that we found after he was murdered, or that we surfaced after he was murdered, included a description of a ceremony in Ua territory in which they had invited him in. And it was a ceremony for an adolescent girl who was like had had her period for the first time. And she was in the ceremony for becoming recognized as a woman. And the ceremony, as Terence described it, included like 24 hours a day for 3 days worth of singing inside this house. And the singing was continuous and like for 72 hours. And he described this process whereby people would come in and pick up the song, and other people would step out, and then other people would come in, and the song would continue. And in their case, the song is this telling of the relationship between the people and the land, the people and the rivers, all the way from the mountains down in Patagonia to the mountains in Alaska, as they later have told me. Um, and the thing that happened that Terence reflected on in his letter home was that at certain moments they would let the song come to silence or come to stillness, but the reverberation of the voices would stay in the earthen floor and in the wood of the structure, such that you could feel the continuation of the song. And for Terence, he was like really clear. He was like, this is the reason that we do this work, so that people can listen to singing. And the singing is very much our way of maintaining the equilibrium between the lives that we live here on this plane of existence and the spiritual life. That's how the Ua people think of it. And when then I think about, the parable of the choir, what happens, how does working together in a community or group help make it possible for me to step back? It makes total sense to me. We rely really heavily on each other to navigate through.
The impact of community and accepting those contradictory truths is so powerful. It really is because when it feels like a fight of just you against the world, it's too much. And to be able to have the awareness that I'm not in this alone and that I do need to rest and I can because there's so many voices behind me who are fighting alongside me. Wow. All right. As we are wrapping up, one thing in your book is, you're going through reliving this, answering these questions, going through these letters. Then at the end, the most powerful part was all those truth demands, right? The questions that will never be answered. For someone listening who's maybe experiencing some of this, who's having these wounds reopened and doesn't know where to begin, how to even maybe accept or come to peace with the fact that these are questions I will never have answers to. That painful truth. What advice do you have for them?
What I can offer is a brief story, but I would refrain from calling it advice because it's just what I can offer from my experience. I figured out that I needed to like let myself be brought to my knees, but not brought to my knees because of the trauma, but brought to my knees in awe and in gratitude I mean, awe at the remembering of like what a gift for me it is to experience being alive and still being alive, and awe at, if we even take something as simple as like, okay, now I'm peeling an orange. And if I think about like all of the human and non-human relationships that went into getting the orange to my plate, it's a lot. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of elements, the sun, the rain, the soil. It's the worker. It's the person who planted the seed of the orange. It's the miracle in its totality, the miracle of this nourishment getting to my plate, and the continuing its cycling back into the earth through the energy exchange happening in my body. Like all of that simple touching in to the material plane in a manner that places me in relationship to life, where I can open the door to gratitude, is an anchor for me. And what it allows me access to is things like I can rely on the available lessons and metaphors in the water. So for so many years, I experienced water as this, you know, I experienced this ocean of grief, right? That I figured out ways to transform. And now I can understand the usefulness and the metaphors that so many teachers and traditions offer, in which we say, actually, when there's something that cannot be resolved on this human plane, we offer it back to the river. We offer it back to the river, where the river can take it and recycle it back into the flow of things, where we don't have to hold it anymore. And so I literally do that practice. I stand at the edge of the water, and I offer up my heartbreak, and I offer up like the questions that will never be answered or will never be able to be talked about out loud, so that they're not stuck in my throat. And so that I understand my place in things, which is that I'm never have been just the only human holding these questions or suffering in this way. I can give it back to the river and trust that there's a relationship in which she's going to do some of that work.
There's been so many moments this conversation that it just wow. Abby, thank you for all that you are, for all that you offer the world. I mean, for all that you offered me today. I am just so grateful. As before we end, your book, so amazing. Where can our listeners get your book?
The audio cut out just now,
Oh,
um, so I didn't hear what you said.
there's so many times throughout this episode that I just, wow, was the only word that came to mind. I'm so grateful for all that you are, for all that you offer the world, for all that you offered me today. For our listeners to get your book, I mean, it's such a powerful story with such a powerful call to action. How can they get your book?
Oh, listeners can find this book, Truth Demands, a memoir of murder, oil wars, and the rise of climate justice, anywhere that books are sold. So, because it's distributed anywhere. And there's an audiobook and all that too, so people can make their choice. I would be honored if some of your listeners read, and then we could hear from them later. We'll figure out a way to enable there to be dialogue.
Yes, that would be amazing. On that note, how can people learn more about you and connect with you?
I'm at abbyreyes.org. So that's ABBYREYES.org. Everything is there.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation. focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website inspiringmygeneration.org to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.